Hello and welcome to the Blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. My name is Connor, and this week I thought we would talk about dangerous situations. So, I often get asked, what's the most dangerous thing that I have to do, or what's a dangerous situation I've been in? So, I thought that would be worth exploring in an episode because it might not be what you think. It might also be what you think, but it might not be what you think. So let's get into that. Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. Just thoughts and opinions, the usual drivel. Alright, so when it comes to the most dangerous thing I do on a day-to-day basis or have been involved in, there's a tendency, I guess, for lots of things to enter someone's head who might not know any better. And this is my own case, so it might not be for everybody who's blind or who has low vision, but I know it's a fairly wide agreement on this particular issue. So people might think it's cooking or using an open flame or using stairs or using public transport, train stations, platforms. People might think it's being drunk while you're out and about, or going to concerts and being in mosh pits, or any of these kinds of things. And while some of those things can be issues, like cooking for me is a big one, but nothing really compares to anything to do with roads or crossing roads. For me, that's the biggest thing on an everyday basis where sometimes it's really just a roll of the dice. Now, I'll explain how I cross a road, and then I will elaborate on why it is a bit of a roll of the dice. So, when I'm wanting to cross a road, let's say it's a normal suburban street, there's no traffic lights, there's no stop signs or anything like that. What I will do is, if I have the dog or the cane, I will find the part of the road that I want to cross over. A lot of times in suburban streets, there aren't actual pram ramps to, cross the road in a certain place. So you might be just choosing where along the gutter you want to cross. So in that case, I will put my heels to the back of the gutter and I will listen. And, usually if you have vision, you look you look left twice and right. You look right, left, or left, right, left. I can't quite remember. But you do that, you see what's coming, and you walk. Obviously, if you can't see, that's a different thing. So for me, I listen. And obviously my head isn't moving because I'm trying to judge what it is I'm hearing and which ear it's coming out of. So I'm listening to hear what traffic is what traffic is relevant to the street that I'm on and not just nearby traffic on other roads and things like that. And I'm making a judgment call. And I'll try to make myself as visible as possible to anyone who might be around that I am wanting to cross the road and intending to cross the road. What I will do when I make the decision to go is I will walk, but I'll try and walk slowly for the same reason that I want to give anybody as much time to react as possible if my decision making was wrong, if there was something I didn't hear, or if somebody is coming at speed. So I try to walk as slowly as I can, not, like the turtle crossing a road or anything like that, but just to make sure a person has as much time as possible to see me. And once I, feel the road sloping away on the other side, the gradient, I'll know I'm coming to the other side, and then I'll feel for the gutter either with my cane or with my foot or something similar, and I'll step up. So that's the first way to do it if you're using those kinds of roads. Now, let's say I'm coming to an actual pedestrian crossing where there's lights. So there might be like proper traffic lights, and you might have actual pedestrian crossing lights where you press a button, it starts dinging, and you know to cross the road. In that case, I'll find the button, and I usually do that by listening for the little beep that comes from it, which can be problematic because those beeps are meant to go up and down with the traffic noise around and the ambient noise, but sometimes the councils aren't too great at making sure they're maintained, so you can often just walk past them because they're so low that you can't actually hear the beep with all the surrounding noise going on. But I'll find that, and you can usually feel a raised arrow on it of which way it's pointing across the road. So that gives you some kind of bearings about which way you need to face. And I will find the pram ramp again, because usually they will always be next to those poles. Now, the issue with the pram ramp is that there isn't really a lot of standardization when it comes to them. So ideally, somebody like myself would want them pointing directly across the road at the opposite ramp so that I have really good bearings and I know what I'm going to meet on the other side. It's easy if I have a cane, and it's also easy for the dog because the dog can look over the road and go, that's where we need to go. So that's what you would like to happen. And in some cases that does happen. But oftentimes you can find that the pram ramp actually points into the middle of the entire intersection on one side, and the pram ramp on the other side that you're walking to actually just points straight across the road. So one of them might be pointing at a 45-degree angle and sloped that way, and the other won't be. It'll be at a 90-degree angle, even though you are to use those ramps to cross between each other. And it's really weird because it can kind of get you pointing in a different direction, and then that's when guesswork has to happen. So I've been in instances with my cane and with the guide dog where you line up and you can feel the slope of the ramp underneath your feet, and it's pointing into the intersection. And if you don't really know that that's happening, you tend to just follow the gradient, and then you might find yourself walking into the intersection, and some of the lanes in that intersection are going to be used while you're crossing the road. So you can then kind of find yourself in a situation where you're like, okay, that bus sounds a bit close, or you might hear people yelling and trying to drag you or things like that, and it turns a very sketchy situation into a panicky situation. And especially with the dog kind of can freak out. They're not machines. As well trained as they are, they're not machines. So they can feel your nerves, something isn't going right. They can kind of panic. And some of the dogs in a situation like that, it's, flight or fight. So in some of those situations, they will just try and run as quickly as they can to get off the road. And in other situations, they'll just stop because they kind of think, well, I don't know what we should do, so I'll just stop. But, you're halfway across a road and people are trying to get past you. The lights might have decided to go green. And yeah, it kind of can really turn into a very scary situation. And I guess part of the problem is I can't really tell just how scary it actually is. All I know is I'm in the middle of a fucking road, and that can kind of be enough to set your imagination into full gear and go, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, and panic sets in. So that's why when those ramps aren't lined up, it can be a really stupid situation because it's such a basic construction task, but it can end up in a situation for somebody like myself to create all kinds of problems. I've also had the other situation where you're coming to one of those pram ramps that point in a weird direction, and to overcompensate, you line yourself up and you think, okay, I shouldn't walk straight. I need to kind of walk in maybe a 10 o'clock direction. So I'll line myself up and the dog up in that direction. And because you're trying so hard not to veer into the intersection to your right, you end up veering into the stationary cars waiting for you to cross. And I had a few situations where, the dog thinks, well, are we going to the car? Or, you keep pushing me this way. Where do you want me to go? And that can be, yes, that's not as dangerous as the intersection side, but it's also just not ideal when you're trying to cross a road smoothly. And it means as well that, the next time you come to these areas, you always have that in the back of your head. Like, okay, what's going to happen here? The third kind of crossing that I encounter most in my local area is roundabouts. So in a lot of the intersections near me, it's just a roundabout. There's no lights, there's no speed bumps. There might be a give way sign or a stop sign, but for the most part, it's just roundabouts, and maybe some of the pram ramps are lined up correctly, maybe they aren't. And the problem with the roundabouts is that you might have cars approaching it from 4 different sides, and you don't really need to slow down as much to get around a roundabout, not like you would if you actually needed to stop at a stop sign. So what ends up happening is you just hear cars coming from 4 different directions at a certain speed, and obviously I can't tell that they are or they aren't indicating to come anywhere near me. So basically what ends up happening is I just wait until the entire intersection goes as quiet as possible, so that I have some kind of assurances that I'm going to be okay. Now, the trouble in my area is that my suburb and the suburbs around get used as a cut through to go to other places. So a lot of people on the roads aren't necessarily even people from the area. And I have had instances where I was waiting at a roundabout to cross a road for 15, 20 minutes because it just didn't get quiet enough that I felt safe enough to cross the road. Unfortunately, what that means is that it's a certain amount of Russian roulette that needs to take place, because you don't have that luxury of, walking to the shops that might be only 2 or 3 kilometers away, and 3 of those crossings are a situation like that. And that could take a long time just to do something as basic as that. So what it means is you have to just make a judgment call and go, I think this is quiet enough. I'm going to move slowly enough that people will hopefully be able to react quickly enough. But you never really know. It's a roll of the dice. And that's not even including if there's silent cars or silent vehicles, because that's a whole other ball game, because you can't hear them coming anyway. And that's when things then really become problematic. It's also interesting as well that you might think, well, it's just the traffic on the road that you need to be listening to, but there's a lot more going on. So I've had situations where somebody on, 2 houses up from the intersection was mowing their lawn, and the fact that their lawnmower is going means I can't hear the intersection at all. And for all I know, they could be out there for a couple of hours mowing their lawn. So that's then when an already tricky situation gets doubly tricky. Or you might have a situation where it's recently rained and the cars that are going past are splashing up water, so you can hear the water. So there's a bit of extra noise happening there, but there might be drains nearby, and there usually are drains at intersections, so you can hear the water running down the drains. So that's extra noise as well. And also when there's a lot of water on the road, the sound bounces differently. So that's another thing you have to consider. You might be in a built-up area, like maybe if I was going to work, there's a lot of not high-rise buildings, but there's, multi-level buildings around. So the sounds bounce in a very different way than they would. So something that is further away can sound closer, or something that is very close can sound further away. You might find that there's wind. Like I just came home before recording this and there was wind blowing in big gusts the entire time. And it was so unrelenting that I couldn't hear the traffic at all to cross the road. So I have the choice of waiting to cross the road until the wind dies down, which it may or may not do, or waiting as long as I can and trying to make as much of a judgment call as I can and rolling the dice and crossing the road with the best of the information I have available. I also had one very, funny situation, even though it was scary at the same time, where it was like a Saturday morning and a guy was blasting George Michael from his garage. So here he is on the corner as I'm trying to cross, and he's just, it was like Faith, or I don't know, I Tumble For You, or whatever it is. I don't know if that's even George Michael, but George Michael or something like that, Boy George, was getting blasted from this guy's garage as I'm trying to cross the road. And what can I tell him to do? Turn it down? So you find yourself in those kinds of situations because, they're just people living their life. They have the right to do that. That's not their problem. I can't really make my problem their problem. But it is always a factor that needs to be understood when I'm trying to cross a road, that I need to take all of these things into account. I often get the question when I tell people about this, well, can't the dog just bring you across the road? Doesn't the dog know when it's clear and when it's not clear? And that's not true. So, yes, the dog can make some kind of decisions, but the way the dog is trained is that I tell her when to go. So I tell her when to move forward, and it's based on my decision. So she won't go, oh, the road's free now, I'll drag Connor across the road. She'll wait for me to give her a command. And also, she's not going to willingly commit suicide. So if there's a car coming that, she's able to calculate is coming too close, if I tell her forward, she's not going to walk out in front of that car just because I told her so. But again, it's a dog. Their decision-making abilities isn't the same as ours. Their eyesight is different than ours. So what they think they have time to move out of the way of is different to ours. So she might think at a different point than I will that car is too close, or that car is too far away. So it really doesn't work like that. It's all based on me and when I decide that we both move as a unit. I often as well come in contact with some really well-meaning people, but I guess they don't necessarily realize that I have a process. So I've been in situations where, cars were waiting and wanted me to cross, and they were giving me the opportunity to cross, but in a situation where 3 of the other roads were still very noisy, they kind of thought, well, I'm allowing you to cross the road, but because the 3 other parts of the intersection were noisy, I couldn't guarantee that anybody from those 3 other sides weren't going to cut across my path. So that's why I prefer to just wait so it's as quiet as possible. But it can be different because, those people think, well, I'm giving you a chance to go, why don't you go? Or you might have pedestrians that, are beside you who turn up and they say, oh, you can go across the road now. But they're making the judgment call that I can go across the road based on their eyes or their ability to be able to adjust to the situation when they're halfway between the lanes or something like that. So it's really hard to kind of go, well, this person who might know nothing about blindness or nothing about what it is that I need to know has told me I can cross a road now. And you can find it a weird sort of peer pressure where you don't want to be in anybody's way and you don't want to look like an idiot. So you have situations where, well, I've had situations where I've walked because somebody's told me I can, and it's really not been a situation that I was comfortable with, or something changed, or maybe they thought I could cross halfway across the road and not the full way across the road. And that's where things can then get tricky. So basically, the crossings I like most are the pedestrian zebra crossings. They're usually kind of speed bumped as well. So when you're coming to them, you can hear the cars crossing them. It usually gives a bit of a clunk. The cars slow down because of the speed bump, because they don't want to damage the cars. And it's a lot more understood, I guess, for all parties involved. Hey, I need to stop here, or I need to slow down here. And for somebody like myself, I know that when I'm on that raised surface that I'm walking along the right path, and I know that the traffic around is more aware of what's required in that kind of a crossing situation. And the same for the dog. It's a lot easier for the dog to go, okay, I just need to follow these stripes across the road, and everything is just a little bit more straightforward in those kinds of settings. At least for me. That might not be for everybody who's blind, but for me, I find myself most comfortable in those situations. And it really is about comfort, because, you know, it can get very daunting when you have bad mishaps where you go, well, I need to live my life. I'm surrounded by roads. I live in a metropolitan area. I live in suburbia. I work in the city, or whatever it might be. You don't have the luxury of not crossing roads, but every time you do, it's like Russian roulette. And, you know, I have some roads that I always cross that I'm just convinced one day will be the end of me in some shape or form, whether it be an injury or worse, because there's just too much guesswork that has to happen because of the way it's designed, or the amount of traffic, or the amount of noise that's going on. And that's why, you know, pedestrians get hit, people wearing headphones get hit, a lot of people who are perhaps deaf or blind do get hit. You know, there was a case last year where a man and his guide dog were both killed. I think it was in Victoria or New South Wales, because somebody was coming along and this guy thought, well, surely this fella's obeying the road rules. He's on the road. And this guy had veered. I think he had a few drinks on him. And he had veered into the path of the man with his guide dog and killed them both. So, yes, while cooking and stairs and mosh pits and all those other things can be problematic, I would say nothing compares to, in the words of Sinead O'Connor, nothing compares to crossing a road, to paraphrase. And you know, yeah, I can laugh about it, but it's a bit messed up, because, you know, what else can you do? You've got to cross a road, and you've got to just hope for the best and work with the information that your ears can pick up, but you never truly know. Anyway, that was this episode for this week. I hope that was informative and bleak and interesting and humorous and all of those things. You know, a little bit of dark humor basically to get you through it. But anyway, you can get in touch with the show by emailing blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. You can tweet me at blindseyepod on Twitter, and you can get in touch with the show on Facebook if you search for Blindseye Podcast. Also, just a shout out as well, if you listen and you do like what I do, or you don't like what I do, please consider giving it a rating in any of the podcast apps or platforms you use. That would really help and be useful. But anyway, I will speak to you as usual next week. Cheers.